Peace be with you and with your spirit. Welcome to another episode of St. Anthony's Tongue. I am your host, W. There's more Catholic content out there than ever before. And we're not starving. We're overstimulated. We're not lacking in devotions, but perhaps we are drowning in them. And yet, strangely, many people feel further from God than ever before. And this episode is a callback to stillness, a callback to simplicity, a callback to a kind of mysticism that burns quietly in the heart, rather than loudly on your social media feed. I am calling this episode, Stop Scrolling, Start Burning. We live in an age of spiritual gluttony. And there's no famine of Catholic content, but there is a famine of peace. There's podcasts, reels, TikToks, shorts, live streams, debates. And there's a dozen voices yelling at you, telling you this is how you get holier faster. But here is the reality. We consume the teachings and we forget the teacher. We speak endlessly of virtue, but we tremble at the idea of silence. We hoard sacraments like rations, and we forget that the bridegroom did not ask for our productivity, but he asked for our presence. We've confused consumption with communion, performance with prayer, and holiness for hustle. But the soul is not a machine. The soul is not this vending machine where you insert $1 and it exports grace. Grace is not a product, and God is not an algorithm. And you're not a project. Even Jesus withdrew. Even the mystics rested. Even monks know when to stop. So if you are having trouble in prayer, if you are having dryness in prayer, if you are having issues in prayer, it might not be that you are not praying hard enough, but it might be that you're praying too anxiously. So let's talk about devotionals. And let's get back to the root of some devotionals, which is the presence of God. Let me be very clear. Devotionals have their place. The rosary truly is a rose garden to Our Lady. Novenas really are a steady pathway towards the communion of saints. Chaplets, consecrations, scapulars, these things are all beautiful and meaningful, but we must remember these things are not the destination. They are not God, and they are not love itself. These things are tools. They are not the treasure. And yet, let's be honest, some of us, we are running a spiritual marathon with no finish line in sight. You're consecrated to Mary, Joseph, Michael, Saint Therese, the Holy Face, the Sacred Heart, and maybe even St. Drago. You are having 9 scapulars around your neck, a relic card in your wallet. You are tracking 9 novenas in a spreadsheet. Meanwhile, while you are cooking dinner, you have the rosary playing at double speed, and you're halfway through a video on how to feast during Ember Days, and now you are exhausted. But listen to me carefully. Praying more rosaries does not mean you're stockpiling grace like it's cryptocurrency. And doing a consecration to every single saint does not mean that God is going to love you anymore. God is not moved by your quantity. He is drawn by the quality of heart. And you can say every litany, and you can still avoid the one thing that God actually wants. You. Just you. Present, not performing, not producing, just present. Let us think about the prodigal son. When the father sees the prodigal son walking down the road, he instantly rejoices. The father instantly rejoices merely at the sight of his son. He does not ask the son for restitution. He does not ask the son for performance to make up for his deeds. He does not ask for anything. Merely the sight of the son made the father leap with joy. He did not say, "Let us check that you've been doing your devotions perfectly." He just said, "You're home." And that's enough. Or think of Gethsemane. Christ did not ask the disciples to perform a ritual. He did not ask them to recite Psalm 51 perfectly. He just said, will you sit with me for an hour? That is all he wanted. Not a performance, not a ritual, just presence, sharing in the presence with God. So if presence is all that God wants, then what keeps us from it? And here are the three enemies of presence that I see again and again. And the first is scrupulosity. Now, many people, we equate scrupulosity with a fear of God. But I still ask you to look at your scruples, because sometimes you might not fear God, but you still are attached to this paganistic way of thinking, or this contractual way of thinking. And I've talked about this before in a few of my episodes now. But this belief that God is going to stop hearing our prayers because we blew the candle out too early during our novena. Or this idea that God is not going to listen to our prayers or accept our sacrifice because we knelt or stood at the wrong time during Mass. Or perhaps we haven't done a consecration to Our Lady enough or at all, and now we are spiritually lesser than others. These things are scrupulosity too. And we forget this. We forget this especially in the mere fact that you consecrate yourself to Him every Sunday at Mass. Again, God does not want industry. He wants intimacy. Devotions, they are not duties, they are doorways. And yet we have this scrupulous way of thinking, and it is very human. It is very human to think, I need to have this exchange with someone. He will only love me if I do this. He will only love me if I do that. But you do not earn the grace of God. God's grace is given freely. So scrupulosity, this is when we believe that God is this divine inspector. We obsess over doing it right. We fear that we skipped a line. Now the whole prayer is null and void. But grace, as I just said, is not this legal contract. Grace, lovers of God, is a love story. What is the second name that Christ was called in the incarnation? Of course, besides Jesus. He was named Jesus. But what was the first title he was called? First is the Lamb of God. A simple, peaceful, sacrificial lamb. But what was the second name? The bridegroom. Not a king of kings. Not a lord of lords. Not a smiter of nations. Not a just judge. A lover. So again, grace is not a legal contract. Grace is a love story. You do not offend God by being human. You offend God when you forget that you are His. As 1 John tells us, perfect love casts out fear, not perfect performance. So ask yourself, test yourself, discern these thoughts you have when you think, perhaps I need to earn the love of God. You do not need to earn it. You need to open up yourself to it. This is the month of the Sacred Heart. And what is the Sacred Heart but a divine furnace that melts away that iciness, that melts away this blockage? Perhaps you feel as if you do not deserve the love of God. Do we deserve the love of God? No, and that's kind of the point, is it not? He loves you endlessly regardless. He loves you endlessly regardless. And sure, we must do what He asks of us and follow His covenant and His law, so on and so forth. But He never abandons us. So the scrupulous way of thinking, we must get rid of it. This is what rids us of presence. We need to invoke God. We need to say the right prayer so He shows up. We need to do the right thing so He comes through. Where can I escape you, O Lord? If I ascend into heaven, there you are. If I make my beds in the depths of Sheol, there you are too. Before a word even leaves my lips, O Lord, you know it completely. The unescapable God. You do not need to summon Him. You just need to remind yourself of His presence, which we will be talking about in a bit when we talk about the great Brother Lawrence, but we'll get there later. So the first enemy of presence, I would say, is the scrupulous thinking, the scrupulosity. But the second one is what I would call spiritual consumerism. And this is when faith becomes content. And we are spiritually stuffed by this. I know and I understand the irony is not lost that I am saying there's too much Catholic content while I am creating Catholic content. But there is so much out there, and we are watching dozens of reels about the Eucharist, and then we rush to Mass like it's a drive-through. We are snacking on God, but we never sit for the feast. But these things, and while they can be entertaining, these things are not meant for entertainment. We are not called to be thrilled by God. We are called to be transfigured by God. And there's just so much content. There's so much to consume. And then we start to compare. We start to compare ourselves with all of these people who are also doing these other things. Or we hear, this is the best novena, this is the best consecration. Have you done this or that or this or that? And frankly, lovers of God, sometimes these things are insulting to the faith. You believe you need to do all these consecrations as if you are not consecrated to Christ every Sunday when you receive him in the Eucharist? Again, these things, they are not new things that are going to give us more grace and stockpile more powers. They're doorways to God. They're opportunities for experience. So the second is spiritual consumerism. I would say the third is impatience. We want to push our will rather than God's will. And I used to have a large, if you know my story, my podcast used to appeal to a lot of the occultists because it was more general and historical, and I would talk about things not in line with the church, not promoting it, but just as entertainment, as history. And I've gotten away from that, obviously. But I used to always say that one of the biggest differences between the occultist and the Catholic is that with the Catholic or with the Christian, we surrender. We surrender things to God. We surrender, where the occultist or the witch is control. And honestly, lovers of God, Catholics do that too. It's human. It is human to control. It is human to sit down at that novena, and if it doesn't work, let's do another one. Let's find a different saint. John the Baptist didn't come through. Let's see what Rita's doing. And that's that impatience. That is when we are trying to impose our will rather than God's. I recently did a playful essay on my Substack called The Soul is a Grape, where I talk about the unripe grape is a soul, and it's still perfect. God still loves the unripe grape. It's just not sweet yet. And sometimes that is what we are. We are this unripened grape. We just need more sun. We need more watering. And then we will become ripened and eventually become intoxicating wine. But sometimes we just need to trust all the time, we need to trust God's will. We are currently doing a novena to St. John the Baptist right now on my Patreon. And one thing I'm struck about with his story is the mere fact that he lived most of his life in the desert, in the wilderness. He did not know when the Christ would come. He did not know who the Christ was until the baptism. And yet, he was obedient to God. He was patient with God. And now I'm not saying we have to go live out in the wilderness, but sometimes we already are in our own wilderness waiting for God. St. Teresa of Avila, who is the doctor of the church when it comes to prayer, she received no consolations in prayer until she was in, I believe, her late 30s, early 40s. Patience, trusting the will of God, watching more YouTube videos, doing more consecrations, praying more rosaries. That is not going to speed up the will of God. Is it chance for encounter more often? Absolutely, but we are also human and we also need rest. Psalm 37 says, "Be still before the Lord and patiently wait for him." So again, you don't become holy faster by pressing harder. Sometimes the holiest thing you can do is nothing. Just sitting, still long enough for your soul to catch its breath. So let me introduce you to someone who lived all of this out, a mystic by the name of Brother Lawrence. He had no platform, he had no strategy, no 5-year plan for sanctity. He was just a humble Carmelite lay brother in 17th century Paris. He was assigned to the monastery kitchen, and it was in the monastery kitchen that he became a mystic. Before entering religious life, he was a soldier, he was wounded in war, he had a limp, he had no education, no formal qualifications. He never became a priest. He was not a spiritual director. He was a cook, and later he was also a sandal repairer. And he spent nearly all of his religious life behind the scenes. And yet his interior life, it shone with such intensity that people across France, they began to write to him for spiritual advice. How is this cook, this sandal repairer, how is he so holy? How is he so vibrant? And he was not trying to get holier faster. He was not chasing mystical ecstasies. He was simply practicing what he calls the presence. He once wrote, "We should establish ourselves in a sense of God's presence by continually conversing with him." And that was his whole method. No complicated system, no mystical ladder, just an ongoing, simple turning of the heart to God, again and again and again. He said, "I possess God as peacefully in the bustle of the kitchen, where sometimes several people are asking me different things at the same time, as I do upon my knees before the Blessed Sacrament." And this was not just a theory. This was lived grace. He peeled potatoes with the devotion of a monastic choir. He scrubbed pans as though they were chalices. And he offered each moment to God with unembarrassed love, without noise, without drama, without burnout. And this is a concept called the cosmic priesthood. And this is actually a very in-depth and complex concept, which is kind of beautiful that such a simple monk really understood it and grasped it, because it's both complex, but both very beautiful. And the cosmic priesthood, and I'll be covering this in my book that's coming out next year, A Catechism of the Strange. But to put it very simply, the cosmic priesthood is lifting things up to God with love. The understanding is that we are baptized as priests, as prophets, and as kings. That is in the baptismal rite. But what does that mean? What does it mean that we are a priest? And it's that we are meant to sacrifice and offer things up to God. And humans, we are ordered very uniquely. We are the lowest rung of spirit and the highest rung of matter. We can grasp a strawberry in our hands. We can walk with our bare feet on the grass. We can enjoy these sense things and offer them up to God in thanksgiving. And that is the cosmic priesthood. It is offering our senses to God. It is offering our sight, our hands, our ears, our stillness. It is when our body becomes a liturgy and our tasks become incense offered up to God. So we do not always need the rosaries, the chaplets. We do not always need all of the novenas, all the consecrations, all the scapulars. Sometimes it is simply lifting our heart up to him while we peel potatoes. Lawrence said, "Lift up your heart to him, sometimes even at meals or when you are in company. The least little remembrance will always be acceptable to him." He did not divide between the sacred and secular. There was no break between the monastery and the market, the dish room and the divine. He also said, "The most holy and necessary practice in the spiritual life is the practice of the presence of God. It is to take delight in him and become accustomed to his divine company, speaking humbly and talking lovingly with him at all times." Heaven begins in attention, not in special effects, not in the perfect daily planner, but in quiet repeated acts of love. So if you cannot find God in the kitchen, then you will not be able to find him in the chapel. If you can't love him while doing dishes, you'll struggle to love him even in your deepest prayer. My friends, you are not a timeline, you are a temple. And Brother Lawrence wouldn't tell you to add another devotion. He would tell you to return. Return to your breath. Return to your work. Return to the silence. Return to the gentle awareness that God is here and that God is love. And in that turning, beneath the noise, beneath the guilt, beneath the pressure, you'll find the tenderness of God, who has been waiting for you this whole time. There is not in the world a kind of life more sweet and delightful than that of a continual conversation with God. So you do not need another spiritual strategy. You do not need to read 3 more books. You do not need to download a new app. You don't need to restart the novena. You need to stop and be still. Because the Father runs at the sight of you, and the Son only asks that you sit, and the Spirit only whispers, be here. So let your soul unclench, let grace catch up to you, because it's been chasing you all along. I will allure her, says the Lord, and bring her into the wilderness, and speak tenderly to her heart. So come into the wilderness. Come away from the noise, come back to presence, and come back to love. Come back to the simplicity that Brother Lawrence never left. And in that stillness, find not absence, but embrace. Let us occupy ourselves entirely in knowing God, he said. The more we know him, the more we will love him. And as love increases, so will our joy. In silentio cur adat presentia Deus manet. In silence, the heart burns. And in presence, God remains. God bless you, and thank you.